Hey guys, before we begin this call with Rebekah Roth, who's on the line right now. Rebekah, you there?
Yes.
Okay, I just want to say this for the audience. We just completed our call, and some of the information that you're going to hear as we get started, you may be familiar with, but I'm telling you, hang on and listen to the whole thing, because we get into some bombshells and some new information that even I've never heard, and I really consider 9/11 research to be in my wheelhouse, but Rebekah really blows me out of the water here. So without further ado, Rebekah Roth. Hey guys, thanks for tuning in. I got to tell you, we have on a very important guest. I know she's been getting a lot of airtime elsewhere, and for good reason. It's Rebekah Roth. She was a flight attendant until the year 2004, and now she's an author. Her new book is Methodical Deception, and of course, you may have already read Methodical Illusion, and she's waking up lots of people through fiction meets fact in her great books. Rebekah, thanks for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me.
Rebekah, can you even believe this is the 14th anniversary here of 9/11? It seems like it happened yesterday to those of us who lived through it. And what a shocking, horrific, horrible day, which of course has been used by our government for everything since. Endless unconstitutional wars of aggression, locking down the domestic battlefield in a police state. It's an endless nightmare for the people. It's bankrupting the Treasury. Rebekah, let me ask you, being a flight attendant up until 2004, what woke you up to 9/11 in this false flag operation?
Well, I had just come home from Europe about 10 hours before this event started, so it's kind of close to home to me because I could have easily been on one of those jets. My phone rang and someone said, turn on your television, which I did. I was kind of jet lagged out, half asleep. And I turned my television on just in time to see what appeared to be a 767 going through the World Trade Center towers like a hot knife through butter. And I first thought that it was a remake of the War of the Worlds spoof or some sort of thing like that. So I just thought it was fake at first. And then I started listening intently because I was right away, they were saying it was a terrorist, and I'm like, no way. And then as the story unfolded, it got crazier and crazier. However, let me just say this, because I was still in the industry, we were not given any more information than anyone watching TV was. So when I went back to flying, we were not privy to any inside track, anything more than what we all knew from television. And so we never did find out how the hijackers got into the cockpit, or if they ever really did. And quite frankly, when you're in business, in the airline business, it's impossible to look at what I just saw and go to work and kind of look down the aisle at people and think, yeah, we'll scramble jets for you in 6 minutes if anything happens, because that day it took almost 2 hours for jets to be scrambled. There was all of this stuff that I'd already seen and I knew was in play, all of our safety nets, and nothing worked. Not security, nothing. So there was lots of false flags, but I didn't look. I couldn't look. I went into what's often referred to as cognitive dissonance because I couldn't bear to believe that my own government either was complacent or did this or turned the other way or covered it up and all of those things. I just had a hard time with that. And like I said, until I retired in 2004, I just couldn't look at what I would see. So I went in there. I didn't plan to write a book about 9/11 ever. I had and I started to write a book, and actually, yeah, we're losing our internet here. I hope it's okay.
Yeah, I'm losing mine on this end too.
Yeah, I don't know why, but let's just see how it goes. So I went to find a character of Middle Eastern name, and I thought, well, I'll just Google search those 19 Arab hijackers from 9/11. Okay, this is like 2008, maybe 9, somewhere in there. I wasn't really paying attention, and I Google searched 19 Arab hijackers from 9/11. And lo and behold, up in front of me came a BBC article that told me that half a dozen of those guys were alive, that the Saudi government was suing the FBI for stealing their identity. And I was like, where did this come from? I was like, this is 2001, September 23rd. And I'd never seen it. And trust me, I was literally glued to a television set for 10 days. when it first happened. I mean, 10 days straight, day and night. I was like, how did they do this? For one thing, we had never been told about Al Qaeda as a terrorist, not a terrorist. We didn't have terrorists in 9/11. We had hijackers. So we never had been warned about the Al Qaeda or Tim Osman, or excuse me, or Osama bin Laden.
Right.
So I mean, I just said, who is this guy? How did they get a hold of NORAD? How did they stop the air traffic control safety net that we had in place? That's what I kept at. How'd they get a hold of our military? And so I knew there was something very wrong with the cell phone calls coming in that I heard right away. In those first few days, you remember they were saying that the crew members were calling in and passengers were calling in from cell phones. But I knew that's impossible because cell phones didn't work at altitude.
That's right. And, there's a Betty Young component to this. You woke up because you understand flight attendant protocol and flight attendant language. But I just want to read this to you as it pertains to, how long it took jets to scramble. You mentioned that here at the beginning of the interview. And I want to read this to you guys from Killtown. Most people may know this. We're not going to go over all of the details of the false flag operation. There's literally hundreds and hundreds and hundreds. You have to believe in hundreds of coincidences to believe the official story on 9/11. But as it pertains to the shoot down and the scrambling of jets, I want to read this to you guys from Killtown. The decades-old procedure for a quick response by the nation's air defense had been changed in June of 2001. It had been in place for decades. Now, instead of NORAD's military commanders being able to issue the command to launch fighter jets, approval had to be sought from the Civilian Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld. This change is extremely important because Rumsfeld claims to have been, quote, out of the loop nearly the entire morning of 9/11. He isn't on the record as having given any orders that morning. In fact, he didn't even go to the White House Situation Room. He had to walk to the window of his office in the Pentagon to see that the country's military headquarters was in flames. Now, you have to remember, and you probably know this, Rebekah, Rummy and Cheney were buddies going all the way back to the Reagan administration. They both played a role in creating the continuity of government plans, which were secret and rolled out on 9/11. Anyway, I have to throw that out there because Rummy and Cheney will surface again in some of my comments.
Okay. One thing I want to share with you that I discovered in doing literally thousands of hours. I mean, when I found out the hijackers were still alive, I put my novel aside and I went just 24/7 for thousands of hours of research into every aspect of 9/11. And the hardest thing I found were people that had really no idea of how an airline operates, what flight attendants do, how pilots and flight attendants work together, FAA protocols, how long they'd been in place, what the shoot down was. Nothing was shot down, by the way. And there really, I saw such cockamamie stories from people that are outside of the airline that at one point I got so disgusted that I just stopped reading their crap and started doing my own research and just couldn't deal with the nonsense. And that's one thing that kept airline people silent, is because there were people who thought the flight attendants, you have to understand, we're all one family. So when something happens in the airline industry, it happens to all of us.
Sure.
And when you see people that claim that the flight attendants were in on it, or they were fake, or they didn't exist, I'm here to tell you this. I've had flight attendants who died on 9/11, family and friends contact me after Methodical Illusion came out. And what I discovered isn't any worse, really, than what we thought we saw on television, but it's a very different story. And it's the only way it all makes sense. And what's happened is the pilots and flight attendants have come forward. If you'll notice that the forward in the hardback and the Kindle is by a United Airlines retired Boeing 767 captain who read Methodical Illusion, called me on the phone. We've had numerous hours of conversations. And every pilot that I've talked to has said, you have found indeed the missing piece of the puzzle of 9/11. You see, in the early 90s, and most people on the ground don't understand this, that a company, and this is very interesting, that a company came to Boeing and they sold a plug-in device for the onboard flight computer system. And it was called the Flight Termination System. American Airlines referred to it as the Flight Interruption System. This was a remote control device that was sold by a company called SPC, Sam Paul Charlie Corporation. The CEO of that company was Rabbi Dov Zakheim, who was also the comptroller
Comptroller
of
at
the
the
United
Pentagon.
States.
Yeah.
And so what happened is they came to the companies and they said, now keep in mind, we hadn't had a hijacking since D.B. Cooper in like 71. So they said, this is how they sold it. In the event of a hijacking and a hijacker were to take control of the cockpit, we can land the aircraft remotely and there it will be liberated by some Delta Force or SWAT team of some sort. And so you got to ask yourself right here and now, then why, if we had 4 airplanes that were commandeered supposedly by hijackers, did they not land those airplanes remotely where they were liberated by a hostage rescue team?
Yeah, that's right. And I just want to let folks know that you guys can go to methodicaldeception.com to support Rebekah and buy the new book. And in the effort of researching your new book, you received a terabyte of information. Now, I don't want to get too far ahead here, so you let us know when you're ready to go there, but some very, very critical information pertaining to Flight 175 has come your way. And we definitely have to get to Flight 175 and all of this new information you got from FOIA reports.
Oh yeah. Well, let me tell you a little bit about what happened to me then when once I found out the hijackers were still alive. I started to look at all of the details that the phone callers made, and then the first flight was 2 flight attendants, which is perfect for me. And what I saw right away were really alarming details. And this is what made the whole thing start to unravel totally, just like a rope fraying at the ends, man. Betty Ong and Amy Sweeney both called out about 20 minutes outside of Boston. Now they were headed west, both that flight in 175 out of Boston. And Betty Ong said right away some things that really tripped me up. She said he, as in one hijacker only, not 5, not 3, not 4, what the official story says, 1. And she referred to him as a he, so we know it's a man. She said he sprayed pepper spray or mace up in business class and we can't breathe there. Well, let me tell you this. After 30 years of seeing duty-free rum spilled, cheap perfume out of Hawaii, you name it. If someone has bad gas, it goes through the whole airplane, no matter what. And pepper spray or mace would do the same thing. If the plane were at altitude and pressurized, anybody who pushed out mace or pepper spray, unless they had a gas mask, and no one said they did, they would have sprayed or maced themselves, the pilots, whoever was at the controls, the passengers, and the flight attendants. And the thing that I first saw was Betty Ong and Amy Sweeney, the 2 flight attendants, were on the phone for nearly 27 minutes, and neither of them ever complained about the effects of the pepper spray or mace that was sprayed in the cabin. And if you spray it in a pressurized cabin, I guarantee you, you cannot get away from that smell and the effects of pepper spray or mace, whichever one, both of which were illegal also to have on board at that time. And then Betty Ong said this, he stood upstairs.
Right.
Now that makes no sense to anyone. And the only aircraft that has stairs are the 747.
Mm-hmm.
But hangars do. And I put those 2 things together and I realized that she's telling me something that only a flight attendant's ears can hear. They're in a hangar with stairs in every corner, because most big hangars have stairs in at least 2, sometimes 3, or all 4 corners, so you can get up to the mezzanine level where the offices are. And she also was telling me they were no longer pressurized because the pepper spray or mace was only in one cabin. And so when I started to see that, and then she said another thing, and this leads right into how the remote control system operates and why a lot of the airlines said no. The flight termination system operates on the same frequency as the transponder for the aircraft, so the air traffic controllers can see us on radar. Now, so once the flight termination system grabs that airplane, it disappears from radar. Something else happens. The pilots lose all communication. And the other thing that Betty Ong said is the pilots, we can't communicate with the pilots. The pilots aren't answering their phone. We can't get into the cockpit. They won't pick up their phone. Okay. Well, nothing would prevent you from getting into the cockpit unless there was someone standing in front of the door. But she wanted us to believe that pepper spray or mace was preventing her, I guess. I don't know. But the whole thing wasn't right. And another protocol that wasn't followed is one of the things that the FAA had in place at the time was that a flight attendant should sit down and not draw attention to yourself, which means take your uniform jacket off, put a blanket over you, passenger's coat over you, look like a passenger, and the last thing that you would do in a hijacking is to sit on a telephone for 27 minutes. And 2 flight attendants did that, supposedly. So I knew then and there that they didn't really have a hijacking. And then Betty Ong confirmed that. She said, I don't know, but we might be being hijacked. And let me tell you this, I'm here to tell you that in a hijacking, there is a hijacker. She already referred to him as a he. A hijacker lets you know as a crew member what his demands are, if he wants in the cockpit, where he wants to go, and that whole procedure starts and the code words come out and the step-by-step protocol, none of which was followed by the pilots or the flight attendants that day happened. And when she said, I don't know, but we might be being hijacked, I knew right then and there that something very abnormal had happened. So here's what has happened. Collectively, I've been contacted by lots of coworkers from Betty Ong and Amy Sweeney and the people that were on Flight 11 and 77 and United. And what we think happened is there were not hijackers. By the way, there were not 19 Arab hijackers on the real passenger manifest. That's completely made up by the FBI. That's a complete lie. And they even changed their lie right in the middle of the stream about 3 days into this event. They made the mistake of claiming that 4 other people were one of the 19, 4 of the 19, and 3 of those people were still alive. One of them was an FAA employee in Florida, and another person with his same last name had been killed in a small airplane crash in Florida 1 year prior. So there's a lot of things that I saw. Well, once I realized that Betty Ong and Amy Sweeney were not in a hijacking, that something different was going on, then I started to look deeper into everything that everyone said.
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
And that's where yes, can you hear me?
Sure.
Do you want me to turn the video off?
Should we see if that helps?
Yeah, sure, we can do that. And do you want to start all over?
No.
All right, it's off now, so.
Thank you, dear. Rebekah, just stunning information. Some of our listeners are familiar with this information, others are not. And I do want to ask you a little bit more about the phone calls and what is possible and what's not. But first, just for those listening, I want to provide you guys my top 3 or 4 smoking guns of 9/11 because we're talking about the flights, and that's really Rebekah's area of expertise. And she doesn't necessarily talk about the buildings or go there, but here's just 3 or 4 of the smoking guns if you all want to research this on your end. The arrested dancing Israelis who say we were there to document the event. WTC-7, which collapsed at 5:25 approximately in the afternoon on 9/11, and the BBC's Jane Stanley reported on it about 20 minutes early, saying that the Solomon Smith Brothers building has collapsed when it was still standing behind her. And of course, number 3, Cheney in the bunker at the PIAC, in control at the White House. Well, it's Norman Mineta's testimony to the 9/11 Commission that a young man came in and asked Cheney if the orders still stood, and Cheney whipped his head around and said, of course the orders still stand. Have you heard anything to the contrary? A short time later, whatever hit the Pentagon, hit the Pentagon. And again, that ties back into that Rumsfeld-Cheney relationship and shoot-down orders in general. Rebekah, let me ask you about phone calls. What was possible on 9/11? Because, of course, some of the first information we heard that morning from CNN and the Mockingbird media was about Flight 77, and one of the first people interviewed was Ted Olson, who claimed his wife, Barbara Olson, had talked to him and given him all this information, and it was only a few years later that the FBI itself admitted that Barbara Olson's call lasted 0 seconds. So what was possible on 9/11? Could phone calls really be made at all?
Not really. If you were to leave, let's say, a major city like Chicago or Seattle or Minneapolis or Detroit or some major city, major hub, where there's a lot of cell phone towers in 2001, you might be able to make a quick 2-second phone call until you hit about 1,800 feet. And the last time I flew was about 4 years ago, and I tested my cell phone. This is just now, like in 2011. Uh, the whole time on takeoff and landing, I just sat there to see what kind of reception. And again, it was still about 1,800 feet, both in and out of the two cities I was traveling between. So impossible. And that's one of the things that was a red flag for me. I'm going, how in the hell did they get their cell phones to work? Because you'll remember Flight 93, they were in route, like well over 45 minutes, and they were at 39,000 feet. There's no way you could be making a 20-minute or 40-minute phone call, which, according to the official story, they still say cell phones. But let me tell you something. For researching methodical deception, one of the things that I did was I looked into a lot of the people who made the phone calls. And so I want to talk about that a little bit, because this is all mind-bending information. I've talked to lots of people that thought they knew a lot about 9/11, but they didn't know some things. By the way, American Airlines, as of January 31st, 2001, did not have a air phone on board working any Boeing 757s, which Barbara Olson was on American Flight 77,
Yep.
that we were led to believe hit the Pentagon. So impossible. One of the things Ted Olson said was she called collect from her cell. Then she called, which you cannot do. She called collect using an air phone, and you cannot do either. You had to activate those with a credit card. And so their whole story is really bogus. But let me tell you something that I found about Barbara Olson, because a lot of people think she was one of the handlers, much like 9B on Flight 11, the Sayeret Matkal, highly trained assassin from the Israeli Defense Forces Special Operations Unit called the Sayeret Matkal.
Yeah, and he was on Flight 11, correct?
Correct. He was on
Passenger
Flight
9B.
11.
Yeah, okay.
And passenger 9B. His name was Daniel Lewin, and I'm going to get right back to him. Barbara Olson, by the way, her parents are Jewish, which is just a note. I'm not saying anything bad, but she does have a Jewish name, which is just some information for you to hold on to. She graduated from a 2-year degree in college, and then she went to Hollywood. Now, we know the connection between the Mossad and CIA and Hollywood, especially HBO, which is where she went to work. Now, for a decade, she worked at HBO. All we know is she worked with Stacy Keach Productions, but we don't know if she was in acting classes. We don't know if she was acting. You cannot find anything. She could have been the copy girl. We don't know what she did, and there is no information available on what she was doing there. However, then after a decade in Hollywood, she went to the Yeshiva's University Law School, which is a Jewish school, I believe it's in New York. She graduated from there and immediately went to the top of the pig pile. She went to Wilmer, Cutler, and Pickering in Washington, D.C. Now, let me tell you a little something about this company that she went to work for. This is a law firm where Cutler, from the Wilmer, Cutler, and Pickering law firm, was the White House counsel for President Carter and Bill Clinton. The other partner, C. Boyden Gray, he was the attorney for Vice President and then President George H.W. CIA Bush. Now, there's another couple interesting names you'll find here that are also with the same law firm Barbara Olson was with. Jamie Gorelick from the 9/11 Commission was also a partner there, as well as the former director of the FBI, and at the time of 9/11, he was the director of the FBI, Robert Mueller. He was also a part of this same Wilmer, Cutler, and Pickering law firm that Barbara Olson was at. So was William Weld. And William Weld, we don't have time to go into him, but he was a mayor of Massachusetts for a while. And Massachusetts is very, very involved in the entire 9/11 story. But listen to this. Here's another interesting thing. Some of their clients, in alphabetical order, Akamai Technologies, that's the company that was owned by the passenger in 9B, the highly trained assassin that his friends and fellow soldiers said he could kill any human being using a pen and a credit card was the CEO and founder of Akamai Technologies. And wouldn't you know, they're a client of the same law firm, Wilmer, Cutler, and Pickering, that Barbara Olson worked at. They also represent another company, an Israeli company called Amdocs.
Mm-hmm.
And Amdocs is an Israeli company that kept track of all the phone calls for billing purposes and snooping purposes for over a decade in the United States prior to 9/11. There's another interesting company that is involved, that these people are clients of these law firm, Avid Technologies, and they specialize in something called nonlinear video and audio editing. So they're just a client of the same company, and that allows you to basically almost do live video editing, and it's very much like what you see done in today's NFL team play games on television, where they have things that if you're in the stadium, you can't even see those things. They're just put in live as they're streaming the video, which maybe a lot of people think that some of the things we saw that day could have been done with this type of technology. To me, it's kind of a more than a coincidence that the clients of Barbara Olson's law firm, that she graduated from law school and got a job right there. Okay, so here's another interesting thing. They also represented and did an investigation. They were hired by the board of directors for Enron. And remember Enron, and they were also hired by the board of directors to look into some dealings for WorldCom. Both Enron and WorldCom were going to court in October of 2001, and all of their investigation and everything was held in Building 7 of the World Trade Center towers. These are very interesting, what you call coincidences, and that's to Barbara Olson. Now,
yeah, I don't believe in coincidence, and I should just add for the listeners that aboard Flight 77, Flight 11, and Flight 175 were 5 employees of Raytheon, high-level employees of Raytheon, a government military contractor.
And those Raytheon employees were involved in electronic weaponry. And just so you know, also, when Barbara Olson came out of law school, she married Ted Olson. Ted Olson, just so your listeners might not know this, because I didn't till I looked into it, he was the attorney that represented the Israeli Mossad spy Jonathan Pollard, who is still in prison.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, see, I know. A lot of people that think they know everything about 9/11 are still learning stuff, including me.
Yeah, you guys, and you can't throw, and I know our listeners don't, they're very awake, and the anti-Semite label doesn't work anymore. That spell doesn't work anymore. And again, the dancing Israelis on 9/11 that were arrested were sent back to Israel by, I think, Chertoff 70 days later or something like that, then went on a broadcast television show in Israel and admitted, we were there to document the event. Well, the only way you can be there to document 9/11 is to have pre-knowledge of the event.
And at that point, we were taken for another round of questioning, this time related to our allegedly being members of Mossad. The fact of the matter is, we are coming from a country that experiences terror daily. Our purpose was to document the event.
Let me just take this a little bit deeper, and it's really important that you understand this. If you believe the official story, then we have to believe that bombs were brought through security, knives and or box cutters, both of which were illegal, were brought through security. A gun was brought through security, because on Flight 93, we have Tom Burnett claiming that he saw a gun and a bomb on Flight 93. That's what he told his wife, and she was a flight attendant, so I know she wouldn't mess up the details. Now, I have an FAA document from the Freedom of Information Act data that states at 8:44, a passenger on Flight 11 was shot. That can only happen with a gun. So then we have pepper spray and mace also, which were illegal to bring on board. So then you have to look at who was running security. How did all that stuff get on the plane? Well, first off, you have to understand this. 19 Arabs were not on the real passenger manifest. But to go with the official story, the same company that ran security for American and United was a company called Huntley USA. They were a subsidiary of an Israeli company called ICTS. ICTS International also runs security still for in most airports in the European Union. They ran security when Richard Reed came through with the tennis shoe bomb. out of Paris, and the panty bomber into Detroit that Christmas morning where he just torched his butt, not the aircraft, the underwear bomber Abdul Muttalib. He was put on in Amsterdam Schiphol Airport. They also run security there. Now, here's an interesting thing. For the methodical deception, one of the things I wanted to do was find out where did people go that really failed to keep us safe that day. And one of the people you just brought up was Norman Mineta. An interesting note that Norman Mineta, today, this very day, sits on the board of directors for that company that failed in Newark, in Dulles, and Boston, United and American Airlines, and all those passengers and all those people in the towers. Huntley, USA, ICTS International. He is sitting on their board of directors today.
That's interesting. Now, you know I don't believe in coincidences, but I do need to say that Norman Mineta's testimony about Cheney being in control at the bunker and saying what he did to that young officer who would give him updates about the plane is 50 miles out, it's 30 miles out, it's 10 miles out, sir, do the orders still stand? Cheney says, of course the orders still stand. That was not included in the 9/11 Commission report, and it seems to call into question Mr. Cheney's motivations and what he was up to that day. But again, very startling to hear that about Norman Mineta. Coincidences? Boy, I don't know.
I'm going to take you to Dick Cheney. Fasten your seatbelt.
Okay.
And this is going to absolutely blow you away. I would like you, if you can do this on your computer, to go to methodicaldeception.com. And when you open that up, on the navigation bar, you'll see where it says resources. And you'll want to click on that resources. And once you get there, let me know. And then there's on the top left a big box that says about the Israeli art students at the World Trade Center. Click here. Click on that and tell me when you get to that page that has some photographs, because this is the elephant in the room that nobody wanted to talk about. And this is one of the documents, a 61-page DEA document that I went over and over and over and connected Israeli Mossad bomb experts to an art group that were traveling around the United States and to an art group that gave themselves the name of Gelatin. So are you there?
I'm there.
So you got those pictures.
Yeah.
Okay, now I'm going to take you to Dick Cheney. Just listen up. You're looking at those pictures. Those are some Israeli art students that came from a foreign country, and their art project was called B Thing. They called their team the Gelatin Group. And just so you understand this, gelatin is often referred to gelignite or blasting gelatin. It's also referred to as blasting jelly, but gelatin, and they later on changed their name because people started waking up to this. So they named their name Gelatin. They called their art project the B Thing, and you will see on the left-hand side a photograph of the title page of their book. And what the B Thing was, there was a group called the Lower Manhattan Cultural Center that was renting the 91st floor or allowed to live on the 91st floor. These foreign art students, and some of them were connected to a group of traveling art students that were all over the country that the DEA found out about because they were going door to door to some of their agents' homes and their offices. And some of the offices were not public locations. So they were like, who are these people? There's Israeli students trying to sell us art. This was just a smokescreen. So you wouldn't go to where we're about to go. Now, the guy in the pink shirt, he's on the top right-hand side.
Yep.
Kind of a pink shirt on. He has repelling gear on.
Yeah.
They removed a window. This was their art project. They put a wooden balcony out, and they had photographs taken via a helicopter that was rented by their sponsor from the Lower Manhattan Cultural Center. And that particular gentleman also had a big party to celebrate this event, and he rented part of the top floors of the Millennium Hotel. You'll remember that from 9/11, and who was there, the Bush relative, and took pictures and had a big champagne party watching this, okay? Look behind the gentleman in the pink shirt. You're going to see two big bold numbers. It says BB18. Those are fuse holders. Now look at all three pictures and look at how many boxes of plastic fuse holders that can be used for remote control demolition. And ask yourself, why would art students from Israel and Austria be having thousands of fuse holders? This building was built in the early 1970s. They weren't electricians. They weren't redoing all of the electricity in that building. Think about this. Okay, so I get this book out. I'm waiting for my shipment of books to show up, and I literally had a voice say to me, look into this. Those fuses, by the way, come from a company called Littel Fuse, Littel Fuse Company. They're located in Chicago. And some little voice said to me, take a look into this Littel Fuse Company, where all of those fuse holders behind those artists are. And now some of those artists are guaranteed Mossad bomb experts. And that's in the DEA document that you can read. So I find out that Littel Company is a subsidiary of a corporation called Tracor, Tracor. Now, Tracor, they went bankrupt in, 81, 90 or someplace like that. They went bankrupt and split their company. They were a government contractor. They split them off into Tracor Aviation, Littel Fuse, and Tracor Defense Holdings. They're based in Austin, Texas. They were bought out by Westmark Systems. Bobby Ray Inman was the chairman of the Westmark at a point. Then Westmark kind of started losing it, and Tracor bought them back. Tracor bought out a company called Vitro, which used to be the Kellex Company. Let me tell you about Kellex Company. The Kellex Corporation was a wholly owned subsidiary of M.W. Kellogg, as in cereal, that guy Kellogg Company. Kellex was formed in 1942 so Kellogg's operation relating to the Manhattan Project could be kept separate and secret, Kel meaning Kellogg and X meaning secret. The new company's goal was to design a facility for the production of enriched uranium through a gaseous diffusion technique. In gaseous diffusion, isotopes of uranium-235 could be separated from uranium-238 by turning uranium metal into uranium hexafluoride gas and straining it through a barrier material. Now, this is kind of interesting, too. So for those of you who remember that originally the first responders were getting calls that there was a missile launched from the Woolworth building. The newly formed Kellex Company's original headquarters were in the Woolworth building in Lower Manhattan. I know, it's just another coincidence, isn't it? They later on moved to Oak Ridge, Tennessee. But now the Kellex Company, you will know them today. Here we are, fasten your seatbelts, as Halliburton.
Dick Cheney's old company.
There you go. I told you I was going to take you to Dick Cheney.
This is stunning information, and for me, this is new information. I've never seen these pictures of these particular art students. I knew about those art students, so maybe I saw a picture of those two, I think that you have on your website, where they're peering out the window. I've never seen these other pictures. The fact that you're saying that these are boxes containing fuses is stunning. Now, of course, those of us who early on followed the work of Stephen Jones and nanothermites and all of that was very, very interesting to me. And then Judy Wood came on the scene and talked about more exotic devices because the buildings turned to dust. And, I just want to tie this in. Kevin Ryan's research, the top 10 connections between NIST and nanothermites, that's an article that'll knock people's socks off because it helps you understand why NIST refused to investigate for explosives or explosives residue. And I don't know what brought those buildings down, but this fuse information and tying all of this back to Dick Cheney, it just brings the whole thing alive in a way for anybody with eyes to see and ears to hear. They must be shaking their head. It's hard to believe that people still believe the official story.
One thing you need to understand, and you can find this out in a simple Wikipedia-type Google search, you don't have to go very far. The MITRE company, M-I-T-R-E,
Yep.
owns NIST. Now, let me tell you something else, talking about phone calls, because this is something else that I kept digging after Methodical Illusion came out for the sequel, Methodical Deception. There was a character who made a phone call. You'll remember on Flight 175 was two gentlemen, Peter Hansen, who was traveling with his wife and daughter going to Disneyland. Doesn't that break your heart? He worked for a company called Time Trade. And I originally looked at that and I thought, oh man, that poor guy. He worked for a timeshare company, just the la la la. Time Trade, Waltham, Massachusetts. Go ahead and look it up. They live on government contracts to the DOD, now the Department of Homeland Security and the Departments of Veterans Affairs. He was the vice president of sales at that company. Now, what turned me on about him being a handler or someone that knew too much is he's the guy, if you'll remember, that referred to the flight attendants as airline hostess. Keep in mind, Michael Chertoff, his mother was the very first airline hostess at El Al Airlines, and she started with the Mossad as well. And so airline hostess is not an American terminology. We've been flight attendants until we were stewardesses.
Stewardesses, yep.
And then in the late 60s, we became flight attendants because men started doing this job. He also told his father, I just use logic when I research, so I don't care what I find, I'm just looking for truth. He told his father that at 9 o'clock, and now I have where they claim the airplane was at 9 o'clock. It was 7,000 feet left side of the aircraft. You were going to look at Newark International from a 7,000-foot elevation. The right-hand side of the aircraft, the Statue of Liberty in Manhattan. He told his father at that time that he thought that the hijackers were going to take them to Chicago and fly them into a building. If he were really in that airplane, he would have said we're going to land somewhere near New York because 7,000 feet is not very high. That's in your final descent after the ding dong and turn off your electronic devices has been told to you. So he tells his dad that, and I'm thinking, wait a minute. Now these terrorists, according to everything I read about each and every one of them, none of them spoke very good English. And so the fact that they're going to go back to row 31, which is the aft section, it's almost the very last row of a 767, and take the chances that somebody's going to attack the hijackers, and tell this man traveling with a 3-year-old and his wife what their plan was is nonsense. Somebody else told him what the plan was, and I believe something was planned. I believe it was Delta Flight 1989 from what I'm digging up, but I haven't got that conclusive yet. But I did find an accident report for Delta 1989, and the feds made them land in Cleveland. But they didn't have a hijacker on board. But they might have had some handlers that needed to get free. So there's some really oddball things about Delta in 1989, also coming out of Boston. So I thought that was really odd. The other guy who called, Brian Sweeney, this is really weird. He, according to the FBI documents I read, he was a pilot. He flew in the Gulf War, and I thought, wow, hero, interesting. Well, he was 6'2", 225 pounds. His friends all said he could kill any human with his bare hands. And if you were ever in a bar fight, he went to a flight school in Miramar, San Diego, California, Top Gun, and if you were ever in a bar fight, you'd want to have Brian Sweeney with you because he could kick ass and take names, right? He could kill any guy with his bare hands. He didn't even need a knife and a credit card like 9B did. So I look into him, and lo and behold, his pilot's wife calls me. She emails me. She tells me Brian Sweeney was not a pilot. He was an RIO. I went, a what? He was a radar intercepting officer, backseat pilot, backseat guy. He was not the front seat pilot. Her husband was. And so these are things that have happened to me since the Methodical Illusion. Lots of people have come forward with interesting information. So I started digging into him, and lo and behold, in his online obituary, I find out that he was an employee at MITRE. Now, MITRE and PTEC, you'll remember, were in the FAA headquarters for 2 years leading up to 9/11. They were working on interagency compatibility. Now, keep in mind, if you look in that MITRE on Wikipedia and learn that they've been running radar since the 1950s for NORAD and the FAA. Remember that, I don't know if you're old enough to know about Strategic Air Command. That's who would have been scrambling jets years ago, and that's when they started. And they'd been working since early 1950s with FAA and NORAD on radar and the protection system for our country since the 1950s. Now, on 9/11, they couldn't see what each other were seeing, and there's a reason for that, because those guys sitting down in the basement were able to make things appear and disappear on radar for the war games. So
right.
at 9:24, a fighter jet pilot over New York City thinks he is seeing on his radar screen Flight 11 heading southbound. Flight 11 supposedly crashed into the North Tower at 8:46. So at 9:24, almost 45 minutes later, he says to air traffic that he sees Flight 11 on his screen heading south toward Washington, D.C. How do you think that happened? Somebody was manipulating the radar.
Yep, and there were war games going on that day, all sorts of different war games. Before we get to this other Freedom of Information Act bombshell that you wanted to share about Flight 175, I'm going to ask you to speculate. What do you think the plan was with World Trade Center 7? Because it's clear to me that that building was brought down by explosives. What was the cover story supposed to be?
I have guessed that. I've looked at this whole thing overall, man. I built charts once I discovered that all 4 aircraft were remotely taken over, and the phone calls worked exactly with when they got on the ground at that Air Force base that later on I found out was evacuated and on lockdown, and everyone was locked out. Once I discovered that, and I got over the fact that my stomach turned upside down, and I literally, I felt like I was kicked in the gut when I discovered. I tried to debunk myself for over a month after that. I'm like, no way in hell. In the Methodical Illusion, I teach a reader how I did what I did. How did I discover this? To find this thing called a flight calculator from airplanemanager.com, and you can punch in any cities, and the code, I gave you the codes for every place, so you can do it yourself too. What happened on Flight 93, often leaving one of the New York airports that hour of the morning, there was a lot of traffic on the ground. They got caught up in the morning push traffic, and they were 41 minutes late leaving. And now, they were supposed to leave at 8 o'clock. And so you have to understand that with a 41-minute delay, then, oh man, all things were breaking loose. When Flight Delta 189 left Boston, it would have been commandeered around 9:35. And so around that time, they're probably thinking, oh crap, 93 can't take off. And it's not off in the air yet, so things are going wrong. Now, they may have just gotten so scrambled that they couldn't grab Delta 1989's flight control system through the flight termination system and grab it remotely, or it could have been just a scramble because they didn't know what to do because Flight 93 was still on the ground. So I think it is possible that they were somehow going to make it look like Flight 93 hit Building 7. Mm-hmm. Building 7 definitely had been wired for demolition. I remember seeing it that afternoon on television and thinking to myself, how in the hell did they get that gigantic skyscraper, 47 stories, wired for demolition? I had a friend in the demolition business. And so I know how long it takes to do a large building like that. And I'm thinking there's just no way with all this stuff going on was a demolition crew going to take that down. And I heard Larry Silverstein said, I just told the fire chief, pull it. Well, I'd been a firefighter. My dad had been a fire chief. So I knew that firefighters don't pull buildings, only demolition crews do. And I thought, what a weird thing for him to say. But it did fall like a demolition. I saw it in front of my face, and I thought, how in the world did they get it wired? I think that one of those planes, 1989 from Delta or possibly Flight 93, were supposed to look like they went in, and there is a possibility that the Sears Tower, remember, it was evacuated. Right. And we have Peter Hansen telling us that they were going to go into a building in Chicago. Larry Silverstein owns Willis Tower, Sears Tower as well. Mm-hmm. And so it's possible that things just started getting mucked up. That's right. Because these guys are not that good. And when you read Methodical Deception, you're going to see why. Because one of the easiest, most simple things that anyone should be aware of was overlooked. Not just the flight attendant protocols. I mean, when I found what I did for Methodical Illusion, I told my husband, listen, I think these flight attendants are telling me something. They're telling me things that their handlers couldn't hear. And you see, my ears heard it because I knew they weren't doing the protocol. They should never have been. If you had a real hijacker and you sat on the phone for 27 minutes, chances are you'd have a bullet in your head, or you'd have your self-decapitated or whatever, but you wouldn't be alive, that's for sure. And you wouldn't be making a phone call like that. The other thing that happened on Flight 77, there was another caller besides Barbara Olson, a very junior flight attendant, and she did the worst thing that anyone could do. And no flight attendant, I don't even care if she'd been flying 3 days, would do this. She called her mom and dad. And some of the other flight attendants called their family members. If you were able to make a phone call from any airplane in a hijacking, the last person you would call is a family member in a hijacking, in a real hijacking.
Yeah.
You have numbers to call that are connected to the security operations of your airline. Even your supervisor. I mean, there's lots of numbers. You would not take it outside the company, period, ever. And so these are the things that I saw, and that's why I started to see, they didn't know this was not put together by Americans.
Right. I want to say just a couple of things. If we can circle back to WTC-7 just briefly. You said it was wired with explosives. I said the same thing. I want people to be aware of Danny Joanko. Go to YouTube and just type in Danny Joanko on World Trade Center 7 controlled demolition. This is an expert in controlled demolitions, and he was shown the video of the collapse of World Trade Center 7 years after the collapse. He had never seen it before. He didn't know that a third building collapsed that day, Rebecca, and like many Americans, they had no idea. And when he saw it, he said, well, it's absolutely wired for explosives. It's a very good job. I wonder how long it took. And then he was told it happened on the afternoon of 9/11. He said, no way. No way. Couldn't be done. So I just want people to be aware of Danny Joanko. Now, of course, Danny's no longer alive because of, many people believe, because of his reaction and his truth-telling about World Trade Center 7. He had a unexpected, unfortunate, and very strange car accident which took his life. And but World Trade Center 7, a smoking gun. How interesting to hear you say that perhaps one of those planes was destined for the Sears Tower, also owned and controlled by Larry Silverstein, who, of course, owned World Trade Centers 1, 2, and 7, and had them insured for terrorist attacks, I think just 3 months before 9/11. And Flight 93, which ended up in Shanksville, is always, I believe, was perhaps meant to hit WTC-7.
I do believe that it's possible, quite possible. I mean, I think that I don't know. I think they had something else going on. And why would they evacuate the Sears Tower? And why would Peter Hansen say they were going to Chicago? No Arab hijacker would go back and tell somebody traveling in the very back row of the coach that their plan, because what if he got on the phone and, foiled the plan? So the whole thing is nonsense. But here's another thing, let me tell you before we run out of time. Also, you remember all the heroes on Flight 93? All those guys, the Let's Roll character that worked for Oracle that had just been in Israel right before that in Rome? Well, that guy and those other heroes of the day, this is amazing. Now, fasten your seatbelt and stow your tray table. This blew me away. They're all 6'1" to 6'4", 220 plus pounds, and all of them played rugby. They were all 30-ish, between 30 and 33, and one of them, and a character named Jeremy Glick, not only did he play rugby, he was the captain of the team, he was also a judo champion. And all four of those guys, instead of doing something to those 5'6", 5'7" hijackers with plastic box cutters, sat on the phone, supposedly, talking to their wives or a phone operator. If you believe that, you need to slap yourself across the face. Here's an interesting thing that happened to me after I started flying. And I know this was going on during 9/11. After we started flying, every guy that was macho enough to do this, that came through the door, because I usually stood at the front door, showed me his ID, his boarding pass, and said, if anybody gives you a hard time, you come and get me. I'm at this row.
Yeah, that Let's Roll story always cracked me up, even before I was awake. The Let's Roll story that Bush used in his speech to rally the American public into unconstitutional wars of aggression. Well, Rebecca, before we lose you, let's leave the listeners with this other bombshell. You mentioned to me, and I don't even know the story here, you just mentioned to me briefly before we got started, Flight 175 and some sworn new testimony that you've discovered from a woman in a Freedom of Information Act. Can you tell us about that?
Not only can I tell you about that, I'm going to read it. And this is her sworn statement, and I've actually built it into my book, Methodical Deception. And you guys can get, it's actually right now at a special price until I get get into the computer to change the price. Once the hardback gets on Amazon, I got to get it competitive. But both of them are like 15% off now. You can order the hardback, and I'll get them in. I'm sending books out tomorrow, so softbacks are going out right away at methodicalillusion.com or methodicaldeception.com. You can either one. It'll take you to the secure online store. But here is what happened. After I did a large audience interview, a woman read this book, Methodical Illusion, and she contacted me on email and said, I need to talk to you on the phone. And so I called her, and she said, you have vindicated my last 14 years of my life because something happened to me the morning of 9/11, and no one would believe me. Until I read your book, I thought I was beginning to think I was crazy. Here is her written, sworn affidavit statement, and she'll be happy to go to court. My name, and this is a different name. This is not her real name. My name is Sarah Swain, and I was living in Otis, Massachusetts on September 11th, 2001. At approximately 8:30 to 8:35, I saw a United Airlines plane fly over my residence at the time, and I was shocked because the plane was very, very low. I could see the people in the windows. I was standing on a deck on the second floor, and I was watching the plane fly over the top of the house, and I lost track of it because of the way the building was. But I do think it was going north when it flew over the house, and after I lost sight of it, I was speaking with my neighbor, and we were just amazed at the height of the plane. It was so low. I shouldn't say height, meaning altitude. It was just so low. We were flabbergasted. Now, I know that it was approximately 8:30, I would say 8:45 at the latest, because I had to go to an appointment in the next town over and be there by 9:30, and I left maybe 5 minutes after I saw the plane and headed toward Great Barrington. That is her sworn statement. She told people that she knew when she got out of her appointment, she was sure that she was going to hear that that United plane crash, which was the United 175, was actually crashed north of Otis. She is due west of the Air Force Base, and that the planes were all taken to. She and a military reservist who was based there contacted me and said, I know the name of the base. I was based there. And let me tell you, we were activated because it was a reserve base. We were activated on the morning of 9/11 after the second plane hit the South Tower. Our entire unit, it's a C-5 transport unit, were activated. When we got there, we found out that the base had been evacuated, and we were locked out for 2 to 3 days and put up in hotels. And I never knew why until I heard your interview. And now I know that those 4 planes were brought in there. See, this Air Force Base actually it services C-5 transports, which are bigger than a 747. And they have 5 or 6 hangars along the side of the runway there that each one of these planes could easily be tucked into. And every hangar has staircases or some kind of moving stairs or metal stairs, some form of stairs at usually every corner. And so when Betty Ong said he stood upstairs, I just knew that they had to be on the ground for the phone calls and for the mace and pepper spray to not affect her and everything else.
Or that was code for you to understand that this whole thing was made up and she was being forced to say these things, because no skilled flight attendant would say that about a 757. Even I, who don't fly very often and certainly am not a pilot or flight attendant, know that stairs really only exist on the 747s.
Yeah, and I thought that same thing, and I even said to my husband, these people, these 2 flight attendants are saying things that only a flight attendant could hear. It's like Amy Sweeney on Flight 11. She, quote unquote, made the mistake of identifying the hijacker as a he and that he was in 9B. And then later on, she called back and said, I made a mistake. He's in 10B. But really, he was in 9B. That was the handler. That guy was a Sayeret Metkal, highly trained assassin. He was also a hostage rescue specialist. And so what they do is, in a hostage rescue specialist job, they go to where planes had been hijacked and maybe are sitting on the ground, and they are like our Delta Force. They liberate the aircraft, which means they get into the inside of the airplane, coordinate it with the crew. We're coming in the front door, back door in 5 minutes, and I want all the crew members to hit the floor and that kind of thing, because we're going to come in shooting. They just they coordinate all this stuff with you. That Sayeret Metkal guy in 9B that was originally tagged as the hijacker. And I know there is not a flight attendant in the world that would tag the wrong person as a hijacker, ever. No one would ever make that mistake.
Let me ask you this. I want to ask this on behalf of the listeners because I consider myself extremely well researched in 9/11. Certainly, it was it was the issue that woke me up, and you're way ahead of me now because a lot of this is new information to me. Now, I want to ask you about this Air Force Base. If your premise is that this is where they took at least 2 of the planes, if not all 4 planes, that supposedly were in flight that day. Remind us, where is the Air Force Base, and then what is your thesis about what happened to the passengers? How many of the passengers were even real? I mean, again, we see these Lockheed employees, we see the Israeli Special Forces guy in 9B on Flight 11, we see all of these anomalous names on the flights, and then, of course, none of the real hijackers. There is no flight manifest showing that these guys were really on the plane. So who was really on these planes? What happened to the passengers, if any of the passengers were really real people that boarded those planes on 9/11?
Some of them were real. And one question that a lot of people ask me, Sean, is that the loads were very, very light. On Flight 93, there were like 33 people. The plane holds somewhere around 180.
Which is unusual for a weekday morning.
It's very unusual for any flight transcontinental. So people ask me this question. The DEA, and at the bottom of that resource page with the photos of the I just said hijackers, Freudian slip, the bombers, the art students, excuse me. On the bottom of that page, you can click in. I think one of those bottom links will take you right to a memorandum that has the DEA, the whole story from the DEA. It's a DEA document. Now, the guy who was getting concerned about these Mossad bomb experts, some of them were in with the Gelatin Art Group in the World Trade Center. Now, there's a temporary construction pass. You can see there. That's a piece of paper that can be easily made a copy of. So that was their temporary ID. So you can see that's dated there, March something 2000.
Yeah, May 1st, 2000.
May. So you can see how easy would that be to just, white it out, make a new one, and make your own. I mean, there's nothing. They're just paper IDs. And so it'd be very, very easy. They obviously had the run of the whole towers. But yeah, it's just amazing how many of those people show up every time you turn around. But the document, you'll find it's really interesting. Their military ID is given, their passport numbers are given. It'll tell you if they're a bomb expert, tell you their names, and you can trace them down. And I know you'd asked me a question. I'm sidetracking myself now.
Well, it was what happened to the passengers, and I think we all kind of know. I mean, if they were real, if they really existed, then they
really did exist. And some of them were handlers. Indeed, 9B was a handler. I'm assuming that Barbara Olson, quite possibly herself, was there, if she even was on the plane that day. And the guy who called from 175, Brian Sweeney, the radar specialist, let me tell you this. He was on the left side of the aircraft, directly across from Peter Hansen at row 31. He was looking down from a 7,000-foot elevation to Newark International Airport. Now, come on, you don't even need to be a pilot, and he was one. But he told his mother at the time he's supposedly looking over Newark that he thought they were over Ohio. And so he obviously wasn't on that plane, and where the FAA claims that plane was. However, somebody had told him the scenario. Whether all of those people that played along and that were working for government contractors like Time Trade, Raytheon, how many of them are still alive is anyone's guess. Lord only knows. But I have talked to a lot of the coworkers that knew the flight crews and know their kids still to this day. And this is what we think. We think that those handlers, some of which definitely did have guns, their FAA is hiding it because we'd have to look at Huntley for security, how they let bombs and guns and all that stuff on the plane. So they're at least trying to hide the gun part. But if a flight attendant if you were taken over remotely, a handler, and keep in mind the hostage rescue guy in 9B would know how the PA system worked on the Boeing aircraft. So he could make a PA announcement to the crew members and everybody. We think this is just, we can only put our airline flight attendant heads together and think, because any flight attendant or pilot would fight for their life for their passengers and their own lives if they thought these people were going to kill them. We think they were told they were part of one of the military war games or one of a test for the air traffic control or NORAD system, and that 2 people were removed from each aircraft until we got to Flight 93. On Flight 11, it was 2 flight attendants. On 175, it was 2 passengers. On Flight 77, it was a passenger and a flight attendant. And then on Flight 93, we had people that called in that were not even talking about hijackers at all. They referred to them as they are going to kill us. One woman called in and gave her family members the her ID to get in her passport to get into her safe in her bedroom because she knew she was going to be killed. And another woman said, "No, they're going to kill us." And they never mention hijacker or terrorist or anything like that. They know they're going to be killed, those passengers. Then you've got your rugby team, the guys that were all 6'1" to 6'4", 220 pounds plus, that did nothing. Those guys all relate to a military-industrial complex corporation and or the state of Israel. So what we think is they were, once the collars were removed from the aircraft, that something more lethal than mace or pepper spray was put in. And before the flight attendants or crew members could open a door, they were gassed by something that would take them down in less than 2 minutes.
Well, this is just an absolutely stunning interview, and we were shooting for 45 minutes to an hour out of the gate. We're close to 90 minutes deep, and I want to keep going. I haven't even asked you about Flight 77. I haven't even asked you about what you think actually hit the Pentagon. I haven't asked you about so much, and I know that listeners are probably wishing I'd ask 1,000 other really important questions. Is there anything else you feel like we should cover in this most important event that happened to our country that has changed everything? Before I let you go, is there anything else we should touch on?
Well, there's so much. Like I told you, if you want to do another interview, I'm happy to send you the new book so you can see what else is there. One of the things that I did with the second book is that a lot of the documents that I'm talking about and that are exposed in the book are in an appendix, so people don't question me. I've had truthers come forward and question my identification. They think I've never flown, and somebody said, "Well, how in the hell would she know how to order a beer and dinner in Japan if she hadn't been a flight attendant?" Because that's part of my very first part of the book, the first book. And mainly it's been truth people that are being very, very nasty about this. The airline pilots and flight attendants, like I said, we're all one big family, and they could not be more supportive of how this was done. And the reason that a lot of people did not, pilots, I should say, not just people, a lot of the pilots did not want that flight termination system to be put in the event of a hijacker taking over the cockpit. They could land the aircraft remotely. They didn't know who we were. Who we, as in we can land the airplane. Who is that? And I never got the answer to that either. And I said, but they lost all communication. And when you have a hijacking, what you do is you want to get that aircraft on the ground so we can get those doors and those chutes open like you just saw happen in Vegas and get you guys out, to get the passengers out to safety before anybody gets shot or killed or stabbed or whatever. And so that's the name of the game. And that's why those protocols were set in place. They hadn't changed since the early 70s, the code words and everything. And those are the things that I saw that weren't followed. And so the most important thing for us is to have communication. We are the eyes and the ears of the pilots. There's a cockpit door. They don't know what's going on in the cabin unless we tell them. And so when Betty Ong said we can't communicate with the pilots, they're not answering their phone, then I knew that the pilots had no idea they were being hijacked either. There's something really wrong. And if they had somebody show up in the cockpit, I'm here to tell you there's a crash axe in the cockpit, in their reach, that they could have cold-cocked anybody that walked in there with a plastic box cutter. As a matter of fact, I found an FAA document. I literally cracked up over this. It's an FAA document. I did. It's in the appendix of the new book. And that's on Kindle too. If you're excited to read this book, you can pull it down on Kindle instantly. But it says somebody comes in at 8:24 or 8:25 a.m. on Flight 11 and says, holding a plastic box cutter, Don't move or I'll kill you. Now, if some 5'6" terrorist hijacker came into a cockpit, all four of the pilots were rather large gentlemen and all military trained. And there is a crash axe right there. And I'm telling you, that crash axe is designed to cut through an airplane. It's lethal. It's something like you'd see in a fire truck. It's not a mamby-pamby little axe. It's a crash axe with a pick on one side. And so the whole idea of some young 20-year-old that can barely speak English charging into the cockpit saying, "Don't move or I'll kill you," holding a plastic box cutter is comedy.
Yeah, it is comedy, and so is the fictional passenger list and the Saudis that were aboard list, 5 or 6 of whom were still alive. And of course, as we've had this conversation, what state, what country keeps coming up time and time and time and time again in this conversation, tying so much of this back to contractors and companies from Israel?
It's everything, the urban movers and the 5 dancing Israelis, to the art students, to the gelatin art group, along with the Mossad bomb experts that were living in the towers. Come on, nobody caught them. They took a window out just to put it in our face. In our face. That was in your face. We are in that much control. And then the guy in the DEA that turned this into his superiors, he was written off as a disgruntled employee. This DEA document got out because it was leaked to Le Monde in France. It's some other kind of almost like a spy type of online thing. And you'll find that document links right to, on my webpage, links right to it. There's another thing that's in the appendix of the Methodical Deception that will prove without a shadow of a doubt that the radar and the voice of the quote-unquote terrorists were created long before the crashes on that day and uploaded, and you'll see this in some meta tags that they forgot are there. When you save a document on a computer, whether you're in the FAA headquarters or in your office at home, it is stamped with a time and a date. It's easy to overlook. Again, they're not that good.
Now, you mentioned urban moving systems or urban movers. I have to mention that. People Google that, and you will see images of the truck that was detained by police on the island of Manhattan. And on the side of the truck is pictures of the Twin Towers, or buildings resembling the Twin Towers, with a plane about to fly into them. It's stunning. This information will never be shared with you all by the Mockingbird mainstream media, which is owned, bought, and paid for by these globalist entities. And so much of this ties back to the state of Israel. And of course, who are we now fighting in these endless unconstitutional wars of terror? The enemies of Israel. We're fighting Israel's enemies. And what an enlightening and gripping conversation this has been. If you guys are like me, you're going to want to support Rebekah's work. You're going to want to go and check out Methodical Illusion if you haven't already, and you're definitely going to want to buy Methodical Deception, because I can guarantee you there's more in that book. There's more nuggets of truth, smoking guns, new information that is new to me and probably new to all of you, that will be in that book that we have not even talked about yet today. Rebekah, can you tell people how to buy the book? And I want to tell you, you sent me the first book for free, Methodical Illusion, and you signed it. If you agree to sign the next one, I'm going to buy it. So tell us how to do that.
You can get autographed copies from any one of my websites, methodicalillusion.com, methodicaldeception.com, and Rebekah Roth. And you can just follow the links to autographed books, and both books are available. It's a secure online store through Square. You can also purchase it on Kindle right away at Amazon, and Amazon also has the softback. The hardback is coming in about a week. We just got it approved, so that'll be shipped to me. And those will be out there. Right now they're at 15% off on my website. So if you want an autograph book, that's a great place to get one. And if you're buying the hardback, you won't be charged for at least a week until I get them shipped. And what happens when you order them is that you get an email with a tracking number so you can follow your book once it gets signed and sent off to you. So another thing I just want to say is that 28 pages that they keep talking about is nothing but a distraction from the real guilty parties.
Yeah, I would imagine that's true, because everybody keeps talking about how it fingers the Saudis and the Saudi role in this operation. And I'm sure there probably was a Saudi role, but it certainly pales in comparison to the state of Israel and the Mossad. By deception, thou shalt do war. And boy, did they do a job on the American people. Rebekah, thank you so much for your time.
You're so welcome.
Guys, thank you. And if this information is as important to you as it is to me, please share it with your friends, family, and neighbors. We got to wake people up because it's almost too late to save our nation. But I guess if there was an epiphany, if there was a miracle and we woke up everybody quickly, maybe we could take our country back. Thanks so much for your support at sgtreport.com. God bless.